Imagine sitting down for dinner with someone you've only recently met. The conversation feels normal, the evening feels ordinary. What you don't know is that the man sitting across from you has already committed one of the most shocking crimes in American history. Years earlier, people warned that if he was ever released from prison, someone else would pay that price. And today, that someone is you. I'm your host, Gabby D, and this is the story of Roxanne Hayes. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another installment of Beyond the Bonesaw. I have a quick announcement for the day, and then we'll jump right into the story. You know, I like to keep it short. You can now subscribe to the show on Patreon and Apple Podcasts. If you become part of our inner circle, you'll have access to ad-free listening, early releases of all episodes, and 2 free bonus episodes a month. If you want even more bonus content, like gory crime scene photos, interactions with us from the show, as well as helping handpick episodes and topics to cover, consider joining us on Patreon. Apple Podcast is limited to what we can offer, but Patreon opens a ton of other doors for us. So Apple Podcast is good if you just want ad-free listening and bonus episodes. Patreon has so much more to offer. I want to let you guys know it's up there and available if you're interested. And to finish my 30 seconds, let's see what's been going on. We've actually been house hunting, and please pray for me because God, is it rough out there. But that's all today, so let's get into this episode. Today we'll be going over the murder of Roxanne Hayes. If you listen to last week's episode, you already have an idea of who she is and who did it. But if you didn't listen to that episode, go back now, check it out. It's bonus episode number 3. It is free on all platforms. It's kind of a little taste I wanted to give out there. But it's bonus episode number 3, The Survival of Mary Vincent. It's also the last episode aired right before this, so it should be super easy for you to find. To understand how Roxanne Hayes ended up sitting across from Lawrence Singleton that night, we first need to understand the man himself. Lawrence Bernard Singleton was born on July 28, 1927 in Tampa, Florida, to Albert Singleton and Lena Richardson. At first glance, there was nothing particularly remarkable about his early life. There are very few records detailing his childhood, but we do know that by the age of 16, he had dropped out of high school and started working. First he worked on the railroad, then he worked in a shipyard, and by 17 he was working as a merchant mariner. As the years passed, Singleton seemed to build a relatively ordinary life, honestly. There was nothing special about him, nothing that really stood out. He did serve in the Army during the Korean War. He was honorably discharged in 1952, and he returned to the Merchant Marine, attended officer training school, and he eventually became a ship captain. He always seemed like he was making moves, trying to better his life, at least in his career path. And on paper, Lawrence Singleton looked like a man who had his life together. He married Shirley Ann Powell in 1958, and the couple remained together for nearly 14 years until her death in 1977. The two did also have a daughter together, Deborah Ann, who would later become a psychiatrist nurse in Seattle, Washington. And to anyone looking in from the outside, Singleton and his family, they appear to be normal. Singleton specifically appeared to be a hardworking veteran, a husband, a father. But as most of us know, appearances can be very deceiving. And the version of Lawrence Singleton that the public would come to know began on September 29th, 1978. That's the day he crossed paths with a 15-year-old girl named Mary Vincent. Now, if you've never heard of Mary Vincent's story and you just don't want to go listen to it, which I highly recommend you do, Mary had run away from home. She felt neglected. She was 15 years old and she took off. But she eventually became homesick and decided to return to her family. While she was trying to hitchhike through Berkeley, California, she accepted a ride from Lawrence Singleton, believing he would help her get home. Instead, he took her somewhere else. And at first, Mary thought he was simply lost. That was his excuse, at least, but when she realized they were traveling in the wrong direction for far too long, she demanded that he turned around. He apologized, honest mistake, but it wasn't. He eventually would pull over and attack the teenager, knocking her unconscious. Over the next several hours, he tied her up in his van and sexually assaulted her. The following morning, Mary begged to let her go. According to her account, Singleton responded, "You want to be set free? I'll set you free." And what happened next shocked the nation. Singleton would sever both of Mary's arms below her elbows, so her forearms and hands are just gone, drag her to the edge of a cliff, nude, she's naked this whole time, and throw her 30 feet off of it to what he thought would be her death. Despite losing more than half of her blood, despite multiple broken ribs, and despite having both of her arms amputated, she somehow packed the wounds with dirt to slow the bleeding and climbed back up that 30-foot cliff. And then she walked for miles until she found help. It's one of the most remarkable survival tales I've ever come across. It's stuck in my brain since I was younger, honestly, and thanks to Mary's detailed description, police identified Lawrence Singleton and arrested him just 10 days later. Now, at this point, you're probably thinking the same thing I was. Surely this is a man who would spend the rest of his life behind bars, right? A 15-year-old girl had been kidnapped, assaulted, mutilated, and just left for dead at the bottom of a cliff. What possible argument could there be for releasing someone capable of doing such a crime? And as if the ordeal wasn't already horrific enough, Mary would later have to face Singleton in court, and there was a moment where he was inches from her face. She was walking by him, just trying to get out of the courtroom. He's there. And he looked her in the eye and said, "If it's the last thing I do, I will finish the job." He showed no remorse, no empathy, no regret. And yet, despite everything he had done, Lawrence Singleton was sentenced to just 14 years in prison. 14 years. Mainly because this was the maximum sentence California law allowed at the time, and it honestly just gets worse. Because of, quote, good behavior, Lawrence Singleton only served 8 years. He did all this to a teenage girl, a child, raped her, cut her arms off, threw her off a cliff, and left her for dead, and he served 8 years. And due to this decision, it would eventually cost another woman her life. When Lawrence Singleton walked out of prison, one thing became immediately clear. Nobody wanted him. Not in their town, not in their neighborhood, not anywhere near their families. No one in America wanted Lawrence Singleton to live in their state. Wherever Singleton went, protests followed. Authorities struggled to find a place willing to take him. This is the sense of community that I love. In one California town, angry residents literally chased him out of it. In San Francisco, a crowd of roughly 500 people gathered, some carrying weapons, forcing authorities to move him under armed guard. And I don't blame them one bit. They're protecting their community, their families, their children. At one point, officials actually attempted to house him across from City Hall, and this did not go over well at all. Needless to say, nobody was interested in giving him a second chance. As far as they were concerned, Lawrence Singleton already received a second chance when he was released from prison for what he did. In Contra Costa County, protests became so intense that authorities had to actually remove him from his residence wearing a bulletproof vest after hundreds of residents surrounded his property. Everywhere he went, the message was the same: we do not want you here. Eventually, the governor ordered that Singleton be housed in a trailer on the grounds of San Quentin Prison until his parole ended. So he literally had to live on the prison grounds in a trailer because no one wanted him. And technically, I mean, I don't give a shit, but he was not safe anywhere else, and it doesn't matter who they are. Your job's to protect, right? Now, here's the crazy part. His parole only lasted a year. So, I mean, he was only on prison grounds for a year, but still. The public outrage surrounding Singleton's release, combined with Mary Vincent's advocacy, eventually led to a major change in California law. In 1987, lawmakers passed what became known as the Singleton Bill, making it significantly harder for violent offenders to obtain early release and increasing penalties for any crimes that involve torture. Crimes involving torture could now carry sentences of 25 years to life, so it was a big improvement over the years. And there were plenty of people who believed 8 years wasn't nearly enough, including the prosecutor who put Singleton behind bars. When his parole was ending, the prosecutor warned, quote, "I think if anything, he's worse now. He has not taken responsibility, he lives in a bizarre fantasy land and acquits himself each and every day. He doesn't accept his guilt and won't resolve never to do it again." End quote. In other words, a man who knew Lawrence Singleton very, very well believed he was still dangerous, and sadly, the prosecutor was right. Over the next few years, Singleton would pick up additional convictions for theft. In one case, he stole a disposable camera, and another, he stole a $3 hat. He did a little time for each. The disposable camera, he did 6 months, and then this $3 hat, he did about 2 years. Before being sentenced, Singleton did describe himself as a, quote, confused, muddle-headed old man, end quote. But as we're about to see, Singleton was far from a confused, muddle-headed old man. On the morning of February 19th, 1997, a man named Paul Hitson arrived at Lawrence Singleton's home. He and his uncle were actually there. They've been hired for a job to paint his house, and they expected the morning to be like any other day. It's just another day at work. Let's get it going, right? They knocked at Singleton's front door, and after getting no answer, he stepped inside the house, and he began calling out for Singleton. At first, he heard nothing. Then he heard this muffled cry for help. Paul followed the sound deeper into the house, and he heard another cry. This one was louder. The closer he got, the louder it was. But as he approached the family room doorway, he froze in his tracks. Inside, he saw Lawrence Singleton hunched over a woman who was lying on the couch. Paul immediately backed out of the house and told his uncle what he had seen. Then he ran around to the front door and looked through the window. What he saw next would stay with him forever. Lying motionless on the couch was a 31-year-old woman named Roxanne. Standing over her was Lawrence Singleton with one hand around her neck. Paul did kick the door and heard another cry for help. He could tell the sounds were getting weaker and weaker. And I know some people are going to say, why didn't he help her when he was in the house? Like, he left, now he's trying to do something. I think Paul saw that Singleton was in there with a woman. He was naked when it happens. He doesn't know what's going on. And if Singleton is standing over this lady, he probably walked in, just saw Singleton naked, turned around, you know. Later, he would testify that he watched Singleton make several downward striking motions towards Roxanne's chest and neck area, accompanied by what he described as bone-crushing sounds. Realizing he couldn't stop the attack himself, Paul and his uncle ran to call for help, but by then, it was already way too late. Now let's sidetrack a little bit and talk about who Roxanne Hayes was. Because far too often, victims become a footnote in the story of the person who killed them, and Roxanne truly deserves better than that. She grew up in an abusive household and experienced hardship from a very early age. Because of that, she made a promise to herself that when she became a mother, her children would know they were loved. And by all accounts, they did. They loved their mother, and she loved them back. At the time of her death, Roxanne was 31 years old and raising 3 children. She had 2 boys and 1 girl. Friends and family described her as a caring, devoted, and hardworking woman. She worked a variety of jobs over the years, eventually finding work as a bookkeeper. She did like her job, but after dealing with the repeated, unwanted advances from a male coworker, she left the position feeling like she had no other option and began searching for other employment. Now, finding work for Roxanne wasn't easy. Roxanne, she did struggle with addiction in the past and had previously served time in jail on drug-related charges. But those who knew her say she was trying to rebuild her life, and from all accounts, she really seemed like she was. Roxanne was married to a man named Clifford, and he doted on her daily. He loved his wife. It seems like a happy, stable, great relationship. They had 3 kids together. 2 were Clifford's. The older daughter, Roxanne did have with someone else, but Clifford treated her like another one of his kids. Clifford, he was a truck driver, so, he's constantly gone, in and out of the house, and one day there was a bad accident that left him unable to work for a period of time. He ended up having to get knee surgery, so he can't drive. He ended up being let go, and he would eventually find more work, but for a long time after the surgery, all the responsibility for supporting the family fell on Roxanne's shoulders, and she carried it with grace. She worked long hours, she read bedtime stories to her children, took them to the park, and somehow managed to make birthdays special even when money was tight. One teacher would describe Roxanne as an amazing mother. Others remember her as a parent who never missed a single school event and was always there for her kids' performances. The day Roxanne was murdered, her husband would say she left home in good spirits, but then eventually an hour turned into 2, turned into 3, and the day started to fly by without hearing from her. So Clifford, he became worried. Then his worry turned into panic. He would end up spending the rest of the night just searching for her, seeing where she was, and the next day he would learn the truth. That Roxanne Hayes, the love of his life, his wife, had been murdered. And as if that loss wasn't devastating enough, her 11-year-old daughter would actually be asked to identify her mother's body. And mind you, some of the stab wounds were to Roxanne's face, neck, chest, and I can't imagine at 11 years old seeing that. I'm not sure why Clifford didn't go in there. I feel like as a spouse, as a parent, you would not want your 11-year-old to go in there and see that, but it's what happened. There's no reasoning why. That is a traumatic event, especially for an 11-year-old girl. Another thing about Roxanne, and this is just another thing about Roxanne, is that she was involved with sex work, and this was how she supported her family. Like I said, she got turned down from a lot of jobs because she had that previous drug charge, and this was the only way she could make income for her family. She still tried to find other jobs, she still tried to do better, but in the meantime, she had to do sex work. That's all that was out there for her. She made sure she was safe, her husband knew she was doing it, and actually, this is how her and her husband met. He was one of her clients. He offered her a ride home because she had a long day of work, and she didn't have anywhere to sleep, so they connected really well. He took her to his sister's house, and Roxanne stayed with his sister for a little bit. And then it was kind of all up from there. The two connected, they fell in love, they had kids, they got married, and here we are today. Her being a sex worker is just one fact of her story. It does not make up the whole sum of her life or make her a bad person. Now, years later, her daughter would write, quote, "I don't think my mom should have died, and I just don't understand why. She was a good mom to me and my 2 brothers, and a good wife to my father. She did what she had to do for us kids," end quote. And sadly, that's exactly what Roxanne had been doing that day. She was trying to provide for her family, and this was a decision that would eventually bring her to Lawrence Singleton's front door. Roxanne was there to do sex work in exchange for money, and for whatever reason, we will dig into it obviously during the trial phase, Lawrence Singleton stabbed her to death. During trial, Mary Vincent, the woman he attacked when she was 15, who we touched on earlier that we did the last episode about, she would actually come and testify against him in trial just to let everyone know what he did to her. In the end, Singleton would admit that he stabbed Roxanne Hayes, and he expressed remorse for her death, but honestly, I'm sure the remorse was bullshit, and he only admitted it because he literally got caught red-handed. There was also a time when Singleton tried to kill himself, and he left a note that read, "I hope I find peace." And I'm completely flabbergasted at the fact that he thinks he even deserves peace. His defense argued the wounds were the result of a spontaneous eruption of emotion, and that Singleton never intended to kill Hayes. I'm sorry, what did you think stabbing her in the face and the chest would do then? That doesn't even make sense. You're a grown man who can't control your emotions? Dr. Miller, a medical examiner for the county, would actually testify for the state, and Dr. Miller is who examined Roxanne's body for the autopsy, and she would actually explain she had 6 stab wounds on her chest and shoulder area, and she had a 7th stab wound to her face, which were consistent with the attacker being, face-to-face, bent over the victim like Paul the painter stated. Dr. Miller also testified that Roxanne had several very deep defensive wounds on her hands, including one that almost severed her index and middle finger. She would also sadly estimate that Roxanne was conscious at least 4 or 5 minutes after sustaining the fatal wound to her heart. So I hate to even say this, but Roxanne was awake, alert, and conscious for all of it, even when the stabbing ended. Of course, Singleton in his own defense said that after consuming prescription medication, antihistamines, and alcohol, he picked Roxanne up and drove her to his house to perform oral sex. Then he stated that after Roxanne had eaten and they had engaged in sex, Roxanne allegedly grabbed his wallet as he was attempting to give her money for cab fare, and a struggle ensued. Eventually, he took the wallet back, Singleton was on the couch, and Roxanne went, grabbed a knife, and swung it at him. Singleton would state that during the altercation, he attempted to disarm Roxanne, and this is when she sustained the 7 stab wounds that would ultimately cause her death, which is, I can't even picture that. Like, you're trying to grab the knife from someone else and it's accidentally just stabbing them while you're trying to grab it, but okay. On February 20th, 1998, a jury found Singleton guilty of first-degree murder, and he would be sentenced to death. While he awaited his death date, he would be diagnosed with cancer and actually die on December 28th, 2001, which sucks. He was 74. I just wish he at least spent another, 10, 20 years in jail. Singleton's crimes did lead to significant changes in parole laws and sentencing guidelines, ensuring that those who commit heinous crimes face appropriate consequences in the future. But that is the only bit of light that is shed in this story. Now a quote from Clifford, Roxanne's husband. He said that he believes Roxanne would have forgiven Lawrence Singleton for murdering her, and, quote, "She had faith in humanity. She cherished life, she had a wild laugh, she would go into dumpsters to rescue stray kittens, she would lend money to anyone, her children were her happiness," end quote. And if that doesn't tell you what a lovely person Roxanne was, I don't know what will. Now, what do you guys think of this case? Make sure you tell me in the comments, where I'm always lurking, and if you haven't already, please consider leaving us a 5-star review. It helps the show grow and reach more listeners. You can find bonus episodes on Apple Podcasts, and even more bonus episodes and content on Patreon. I'm Gabby D, and I'll see you guys next week. Until then, always remember the names behind the headlines.